Mhm. Oop, what's gone wrong? Oh my God. Not sharing. Right, okay. Share screen again. Right. Hello. I'm hoping that you are hearing me. Can you just give me an indication that you are? Oh, great. Thank you very, very much. I can see some raised hands. You are hearing me. I'm really happy that so many of you are coming to join me in this talk. Thank you very, very much for joining me. Thanks also to the Language Show for inviting me. And first up, I must apologise, my video isn't working, which is why you don't see a moving image of me. But hopefully the slides will engage you visually, and I'm hoping the message will too. And please feel free to use the chat function between yourselves, although I'm sorry I won't be able to get involved in that during the talk. But I'm hoping there's going to be some few minutes at the end that we can have some questions. So without further ado, I'm going to get started because I have got a lot to get through in 45 minutes. So I'm Hayley Harris, as you know, freelance translator and language management researcher. And the presentation I'm giving you today is revaluing the human contribution to the translation business. So I want to focus on human beings for a change, because technology is great, but there's quite a lot of it, and maybe we need to think about us humans a little, and that's what today's all about. And I'm doing this really in an age when we are increasingly seeing more and more technological advances, not least in translation, which is putting pressure on the professional status, our income, our time, etc. So I thought it was a good idea to maybe review and revalue what it is that human beings contribute to this translation business that we're in. And oops, sorry, I've gone too far already. Right, there's me. You've seen a little bit of me already. So I'll just give you a bit of background about me and the aim of this presentation before I get started. So as I say, I'm a freelance commercial translator. I've been doing that now for 18 years, working from home, as we're all used to doing right now. And before that, I worked in a couple of organisations where I was asked to use my language skills to communicate across the language barrier in a business context. And in all of those settings that I've worked in, both as a translator and in organisations, I felt that there was more to cross-lingual communication than just the language itself. But I couldn't quite put my finger on what I meant by that. So I went off and did a PhD and investigated it a bit more. And indeed, I did find that there was a lot more to cross-lingual communication than just the words and the sentences that we put together. And I want to draw on some of that research today. So the PhD I received in 2016, which was looking at cross-lingual communication broadly, not just translation, but all manner of types. And since that time, I've been continuing to have some involvement with academic research, albeit that I'm not a paid academic, so it's very much for my own interest purposes. And the interest areas there are international business, organisation studies and translation studies, which are the three disciplines that I'm particularly interested in, and organisation studies is where my PhD is situated. And so what I want to do today is to bring some of that research to bear on this proposal to revalue the human contribution to the translation business. What I want to do is to combine the research knowledge with some practical experience as a translator to suggest ways in which we can enhance the value of what it is we humans do in the translation business. So that's the aim of the next 45 minutes. But the overarching aims that I've got going forward generally is that I want to maintain this cross-disciplinary dialogue between academics and language practitioners, because I think we both stand to benefit an awful lot from that. I've had a foot in both camps now for just over 10 years, and I've gained an awful lot from the academic world to inform my day-to-day practice. And likewise, I've been feeding into their research, which informs their progression of research in their various fields. So it's very much a very, very fertile cross-disciplinary relationship that we have. And I think it's one that we could all benefit from if we engage in it. So the other thing that's driving this presentation is a feeling I had, and it was really borne out last year with a mission statement published by the Chartered Institute of Linguists, because I feel that the denigration, like the Chartered Institute says here, the denigration of the status of the professional in languages, it's not somebody's fault. You know, we can't lay the blame at somebody's feet. We have to take some responsibility for it ourselves in our professional life. And I think the way to do that is exactly what the mission statement says here, is that maybe we need to start changing people's minds. Now, this talks about changing minds on standards and pay, but what I'm going to talk about today is how to change people's minds about what it is we actually do, or rather refocus their minds, because I think they may have forgotten. So that's what this presentation is. It's me taking a little bit of my responsibility as a translation professional and making a case for the translator, saying this is how we need to change people's minds about what we do. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to build a case, a bit like you might build a case for the defense of the human translator standing up in court. So I'm going to start by giving you the background to the case. What is the translation business, or at least how I see that translation business, which may be a bit broader than would otherwise be thought of. I'm then going to look at language and translation, and I'm going to redefine them. I'm going to draw on the business research here as well that I was involved in. So I'm going to be looking at language, a conventional view, and then an alternative view, and seeing how that helps translation professionals. I'm then going to look at how those differing views of language have an impact on translation. So what in rethinking language, how can we rethink translation? And then I'm going to talk about what the implications are of those conventional and alternative views of language and translation in practice. So what are the implications in real life? From there, I'm going to propose that we can see the value of translators as business stakeholders, which at this point you might think, oh, that's a bit of a leap. But I'm hoping by the time you get there, you'll be with me in my case. You'll be hopefully on my case, on my side, and you will see, like I do, that that's a natural conclusion to draw. And then I'm going to sum up by giving a summary of the old view, if you like, and the new perspectives. And then at the very end, I'm going to give you a couple of action points, which every single one of you, no matter what you do, whether you're a translator or whether you're not, you will be able to take those action points away today and start working with me to change people's minds about the translation business. So what is this translation business? Well, this is how I see it. Basically, this comes from the point that translation is all about transforming a text from one language into another. That's simply put. So translators are at the center of that because they're the ones translating and transforming that text into the different languages. But they're not the only people involved in the translation business, of course, because they're usually doing that work because people have asked them to do it, usually for money, not always, but there's somebody that's going to be wanting to buy that translation in order to perhaps progress their own business need, whether that's a self-employment basis or whether they're working on behalf of a company. So you might be thinking of a company, let's say in Japan, who wants to export its products worldwide. They want to reach an international audience, so they need to get their product catalogues and their websites and their publicity material all translated into those different languages. So they will be doing that because they've got a business interest themselves. They want to make profit for their own company to pay their salary. And they're going to pay the translator to do that job and hopefully give them more work if that translator does a good job. But the buyers are not just the only ones involved, because the buyers are themselves going to be selling products or services to people far and wide, and they are going to be buying those products and services relying on the translation that's been put at their fingertips to be able to make their purchases. So these users of translators, they can be typically, you may have worked in a company yourself, you're buying products from abroad because your company needs them to make something or to provide a service. You're not paying for the translation, but you're the one that's reading the catalogue in translation or the instruction manual on how to operate a machine. So you're deriving a benefit from that translation, which is helping you to do your job, support the business that you're working for, to pay your salary. And so the business world goes round. So there's a lot of users of translators. I mean, even people going on holiday who aren't working for anyone, but they're wanting to go on holiday abroad. Not now exactly, but when we can again. We might want to use translated tourist information to be able to plan our itineraries and that kind of thing. So users of translations are not necessarily paying for the translation, but they are deriving benefit and value from it. Translation agencies, of course, are involved because sometimes the buyers go through the agencies to get to the translators. But I don't think the business stops there, because we have these professional bodies like the Chartered Institute of Linguists, the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, and they provide us as translators with an awful lot of ongoing support on a daily basis. They put together webinars, they give us mentoring, they give us professional development sessions, magazines, journals, all kinds of support. They're a reference point if we have queries and we need advice. And they are the people who are underpinning the translation profession and the business every single day of the week. So they're very much involved in the business, even though it's in a more of an indirect sense. And I'm also including universities, even schools, academics, teachers and students of translation studies, languages and business, because all of these people are either involved in shaping tomorrow's business workers or translators, or else they are the people that are being trained and receiving the education that will enable them to go into those professions later on. And many of those professions, again, if they're working in global businesses, they might not be using translations directly or paying for them, but their business livelihood and their job will nevertheless depend on translated material. So for that reason, I see anybody who sits in one or more of those quadrants as being part of the translation business. They've got an interest in it, they've got a stake in it. So if you are in any of those quadrants, then this presentation is for you, and the action points are for you at the end too. So I said I'd redefine language, and I said I'd start to use a bit of business research to do that. So what I'm going to start with is by giving you a conventional view of language, as has been found through international business research. There has been research into many multinational corporations who have language problems to overcome in their day-to-day work, and international business study academics have found that what these multinational corporations are doing when they try to solve their language problems, whether it's translation or whether it's verbal communication, they're actually seeing language as a code, a set of words that we fashion together in order to produce a sentence, produce a phrase, and to communicate a message. So they're seeing language very much as individual components, individual words that need to be decoded from one language, encoded into another. Or to put it another way, they see language very much as being the nuts and bolts of communication. So, the words are like individual nuts and bolts that have to be fastened together in order to make some kind of meaningful message. And where does that language reside? Well, that might be a question you've never even thought to ask. But again, the underlying assumption to all these business decisions made about language tends to be that language lives in dictionaries, in glossaries, online dictionaries, Google Translate. If we need to know what something means, we'll just go online and find it. And so that is how language is seen in a lot of multinational companies that have been researched. There's a couple of references there that I'm drawing on in particular. So the assumptions that these business decisions that are underlying these business decisions of these multinational corporations. They see language as being a form of code or nuts and bolts of communication. So in other words, they see language very much as a mechanical problem. So if they see language as a mechanical problem, how does that affect the way they solve the problem? So if we look at translation now, which is a solution to that problem, if the language problem is a mechanical one, then it comes as no surprise that the solution sought tends to be a mechanical solution, or at least that's the obvious solution to reach for. And of course, you know, the vision is that you get these nuts and bolts, you package them all up into a neat little box, you push it through the machine brings it out the other end in a similarly neatly packaged box, albeit in a different language. And then it flies off the line, ready to use in whatever text it's required in. And that's the vision. Excuse me, just have a quick sip of water. But of course, the reality is not quite matching that vision, because as this very unscientific graph shows, we have made a lot of progress in machine translation over the years, but there remain lots of problems. And even now, you know, 4 years on from that chart, we're by no means closing that gap anytime soon. And I wondered, as a translator, I've reflected on this and thought, well, why is it that machines haven't got language and translations sewn up? You know, why is it that there are still so many problems? And I came to the conclusion, and again, based on the research that I've done myself, that that's because this view of language is not a particularly, well, it's quite a simplistic one. And it's, to some extent, it's almost flawed because it doesn't really give the whole picture. So I'm just going to take you now to an alternative view of language, because I think this one is more helpful. So to make this point, I'm drawing on some research that was done by Alison Phipps, and this was in the world of tourism, actually. And she was looking at verbal communication and did some research on that. And her research found that really language is not so much nuts and bolts of communication, but it's more a means of maintaining a communication relationship. So it's language is actually what we do. It's actually what we do in order to engage with each other and to establish and maintain relationships with each other. And I think that's exactly what language is for me. And there is no better example than right now, because the only way I am engaging with you right now is through language. You can't see me, I can't see you. I'm just looking at this PowerPoint for the 100th time, hoping that some of you are still out there with me. And you know, we can't see each other, but I'm nevertheless trying to engage you and trying to get you on board with this case that I'm building. And I'm doing that through language and language alone. So, you know, this is very much, I think, what language is. And again, following this argument, where does this language live? Well, I can assure you, I'm not reaching for dictionaries in order to fashion together sentences. I haven't got the time. The language I'm coming up with right now is coming out of me. It's embodied within me. And this is what Phipps says, you know, languages are embodied within us. We learn them, we assimilate them, and they become part of us. And this is true of language skills, of course. You know, when we have our French and our German language skills, if I go on holiday for a week, I can't say to somebody, here, have my German skills, I don't need them this week. I have to take them with me because they can't be detached from me in any way. So these language skills that we have, any language skills, they are embodied, they live within us, and that's where they reside ultimately. And she comes up with this other concept, which was part of the title of my thesis, is this concept of languaging. And that's what she says we're doing when we are putting these language skills into practice to communicate across the language barrier. So this languaging, it's not just about translating or interpreting, it's about the physical and the mental effort that's largely invisible as well, that we undergo in order to put our language skills into practice as we go across the language barrier, whether that's into our own language or into another language. So if we take language then as something that's embodied as a means of maintaining and communicating relationships, then how does that help us to redefine translation? Well, this is how I think it helps, because first of all, it casts translation now as a human problem rather than a mechanical one, because it's a problem about maintaining relationships. And as translators, what we're being asked to do is to maintain and communicate those relationships between authors and readers, because authors are wanting their text to be read in a variety of different languages, which none of which they speak. So, but they want the readers nevertheless to read those languages and texts as if they had been written in their own language. So they ask a translator to come in and intervene, to step into that author-reader relationship just for a short time, so that that text is translated the way they want it to be. And as translators, I think what we're also doing here is entering into very temporary relationships with the author and the readers of the texts that we're working on. The way we do this, if you think about, if you are a translator, if you think about when you first get hold of a text, you look at it and subconsciously you're asking yourself questions like, what's this about? What kind of tone is it striking? Who's the author talking to? Who are they aiming at? What do they want the reader to do with this text? How do they want the reader to feel? Is this for a lay audience? Is it for an expert audience? Is it for older people, younger people? Who's it for? Business people? You're asking yourself all those kinds of questions because you're trying to determine how you should style this text. So what you're doing is trying to get into the author's head. You're trying to understand what the author wants the reader to do with this text. So you're doing all of that and thereby establishing a relationship with the author. You then have to think about the readers, because you think, okay, the author wants to say this, but actually, if I just translate that literally as a machine might, the reader just isn't going to engage with that at all. So you then have to establish a relationship with this unseen reader and think about getting into their heads. How would this engage me as a reader if I was wanting to go on holiday to Poland, as I was this year and couldn't go? How would I be attracted to go to a certain place? How would that material appeal to me? So, as a translator, you're having to engage in the relationship with the author and the readers in order to render that text as faithful to the author's requirement as possible, to get the reader to act on it. And then we have to step away and leave no sign of our involvement. So there's the human problem. That's what we're doing as translators. So translation, when seen in this way, starts to be able to be seen as a human solution. It's about humans talking and communicating with each other. And it's a human being that understands how that's done and understands how to do it to everybody's best concern. So following this idea of languages being embodied within us, we can see translation as an embodied, person-centered practice. And if you think again about translation, it is very much embodied, because all of the work that we do, sitting as a translator at your desk every day, crisscrossing that language barrier 1,000 or more times, probably at word level sometimes, but then, sometimes it's at sentence or phrase level. That is all going on inside of our heads, which in turn has a physical impact, because at the end of the working day, we feel very tired, or at least I do. So the brain's had a workout, and it feels like the body's had a workout as well. So it's very much a person-centered practice. And all of that effort that we're making is internal, it's invisible. Nobody can see what we're doing, but we can feel it. And the reason we put all of that internal effort in is because we want that text to be effortless to read. On behalf of that author, we want the text to read for those readers as if it had been written in their language. We don't want the readers stumbling over inappropriate words, incorrect formulations of sentences and incorrect messages. So we are putting an awful lot of effort in so that readers don't have to. So what I would like to say here is that we're not only investing as translators our language skills, our subject knowledge, our professional and life experience. We're bringing all of that in, of course, but we're also investing a heavy part of ourselves because of this internal effort that we're going through all day long, and also because we are drawing on our ability to create and maintain relationships and our understanding of how those relationships work and how to render them through text. And we're doing all of that, so we're actually doing probably more than we realize we're doing. I hope I've given you a new facet of value to add to your portfolio of skills there. But we really are investing part of ourselves. So I'm going to come back to that point of investment of the self a little bit later when I talk about stakeholders. But for now, what I want to do is bring these two views of language and translation and present to you how I think they play out in reality. So let's take the conventional view first. You'll remember that this saw language as a set of code or a set of nuts and bolts to be put through a machine. And I think the vision here for a lot of organizations when they want to use machine translation to solve the language problem, the vision is that, you know, the language will more or less be churned out with minimal effort, minimal cost, and maximum value at the other end. But I think actually what happens when it comes out of the machine is not quite the beautifully packaged box that we see there, but rather something more patchwork in nature. Certainly the machine translated texts that I've seen tend to be very much like a patchwork, where, you know, you read a sentence and your mind's tripping over the words. They're incorrect, they're inappropriate, the sentence structure's terrible, doesn't flow, sounds a bit pidgin at times, very stilted, that kind of thing. So there's quite a lot of work to be done, really. And I think the vision that organizations have when they ask us to do some kind of post-editing work is that we can render that patchwork as if it was a flawless piece of fabric, let's say, to continue that metaphor. But, you know, no patchwork can ever be rendered flawless. We can only do so much. Now, this is not my face, as you know, because you've seen a photograph, but, you know, this could be the face of somebody, either the translator that's presented with a machine translation, or worse, it could be the face of a reader where that organization hasn't even bothered to get that machine translation post-edited. Now, if that's the face of a reader that's wanting to buy something from a business, I think that's not good news for the business, because that reader is going to be puzzled, confused, and quite likely, with attention spans being so small as they are these days, that reader is going to be thinking, well, I just can't be bothered to wade through this anymore. I'll try and find a website or a catalogue that reads a bit more fluently so I can actually understand what it is that this product is trying to do for me and whether I want to buy it. And equally, it doesn't give a very good image of the organisation that thinks it can cut corners by just putting out second-rate text, even if it purports to be selling first-rate products. So that's not great news if it's the reader, but as I say, it's not great news if it's the translator doing a post-editing job either, because what we're then having to do is effectively, another metaphor here, but bash a few square pegs into round holes. With a machine translated text, you know, you can't change the basic background of it. You've really got to just tweak what's in there as best you can to make it read as well, as fluently and as fluidly as you can, given the fact that the actual framework of the text is going to remain pretty rigid. You know, short of retranslating the whole thing, there's only so much you can do. So again, this is an issue. I still think this is an issue for businesses, because if that text is still showing signs of, you know, little bits here and there that's not quite fitting together right, or there's not quite a flow going on, because, you know, there is only so much time we have to do post-editing, then that's not really good news for the business. And for all that business knows, they could actually be losing customers. How do we know how many people walk away from our business without even clicking on something, you know, if it's a website? How do businesses know how much business they've lost because somebody's just clicked away to another website? Perhaps they've got algorithms that measure that kind of thing. But, you know, it's one of those risks that businesses are taking, but they might never be able to measure, because you can't measure the business that walks away. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean to say businesses shouldn't be thinking about that, because it is a genuine risk. So the alternative view, let's have a look at that. This is where you'll remember languages are seen as maintaining and communicating relationships, and language and translation is a person-centered practice. So I've put the person in the center there, the translator, who has, well, either she's just looked at a machine translation job and thought, oh dear, or else she's had a very long day languaging while she's been doing some translation. Either way, she's showing signs of all that internal effort that goes into the work of translation. The vision I think that organizations have of human translators could be one of the fact that, well, it takes a long time. You know, we have to give it to a translator and allow them so many days, weeks, however long to do this job. And also it costs us more money, both of which are resources in short supply. And therefore it's not appealing always for businesses to employ a human translator. And that's where the machine is also very appealing. However, the practice of reality of a human translator goes back to that point I was making earlier about this investment that we make and all this internal effort that we make. Because in making all that internal effort and engaging with the author, with the readers, we make the text effortless to read. So the shopper, the buyer can just get on with, you know, paying out for what they want to buy. They can look at the website, they can decide what they want to buy, they can enjoy reading the website and be engaged and allured by whatever it is they're being sold. And before they know it, you know, they've spent another £500 on their credit card. That's what the business wants to achieve, really. Likewise, the employee that's trying to learn the ropes for a new machine that's coming in tomorrow and their job depends on it, they're going to want to read a manual that doesn't just tell them the technical details of how to operate a machine, but it needs to read fluently. You know, even a technical manual has to read fluently and fluidly so that that reader doesn't start stumbling over inappropriate wording and complex sentences that needn't be complex, if all the manual is trying to do is tell them how to do their job. And all of these things will be enhancing or, they'll be maintaining or even enhancing the business's sales, their reputation and image, and ultimately their bottom line, the revenue that that business makes. Now, again, these gains of using a human translator, to some extent, they might be invisible. These businesses that are using human translators might not, well, hopefully they do appreciate how much value we bring, but they might not appreciate it until, you know, one day they decide, oh, let's try a machine, and you know what, the machine doesn't really deliver. But you've only got to lose your reputation quite badly on one occasion. That can be very, very difficult then to claw back. And sometimes, you know, it means really that you're going to be introducing a bit of risk into your business that needn't be there. If you've got a human being there that's qualified, that's got the right set of language skills and subject skills, then that human is going to likely do a far better job and really be having an interest in maintaining the business's image and reputation, because when all said and done, that business is paying for their translation, so they're going to want that business to continue to be successful. So that's the positive side, if you like, of human translators, is that we do add a lot of value, albeit in a kind of an invisible, unseen way. And that's what I want to move on to now, because I want to go back to that idea of the investment of self and just propose that we should be seeing now that translators are in fact business stakeholders. So to go back to the business literature again here, what are stakeholders? Well, stakeholders are not just shareholders. They're not just people who put money into a business. They actually put expertise and time and effort and commitment into businesses as well. And that's why stakeholders can be seen as this broader group of people, which includes suppliers. And I've highlighted suppliers because, of course, that's what translators are. So these people are all stakeholders. We all have a vested interest in the survival and the thriving of that particular business. And why are these stakeholders important? Well, Freeman, who's a stakeholder theory scholar, he kind of identifies this point, is that stakeholders are important because the organizations that want to be effective are the ones that will pay attention to the relationships that can affect the achievement of what that organization is trying to do. So in other words, the effective firm recognizes that business is all about relationships and that managing those relationships is important. And of course, the relationships here include with the suppliers, you know, with your stakeholders. So Freeman is actually saying there that business is all about relationships and that businesses need to manage and foster those relationships in order to be successful. So I think following Freeman, it's not difficult then to say, well, actually then translators should be seen as stakeholders investing in business. And this is what I'm proposing here. We fit the definition because we're suppliers of translated texts, and we invest in the business because we are investing our language skills, our subject expertise, but we're also investing ourselves, you know, that big part of us that's going on invisibly, but it's nevertheless an investment that we're making. And we're making that investment in relationships. Relationships with the author and the reader in order to get that translation done. But then ultimately we're investing in that author-reader relationship, or to put it another way, the business-customer relationship, because it'll be the business who's written the text for the customer reader to read. So ultimately we're investing in that business relationship to hopefully maintain it and help it to thrive. Therefore, I would conclude, and I hope you'll be with me on this, is that translators add value to business by investing their skills and themselves in relationships that affect the achievement of an organization's purposes. And that follows the Freeman quote that you saw on the previous slide. And the reason I've highlighted themselves and relationships here is because they are two things that humans have that machines don't. Human beings have a self, and human beings are able to engage in quite complex relationships. And that's two things that machines don't have. You know, machines don't have a self, and machines are not able to engage in certainly not very complex relationships. And I think probably that's why as translators, we have a bit of difficulty you know, maybe working with machine translation. Perhaps that's why we don't like them very much, is because actually what we're being asked to do is engage with a machine. You know, that author-reader relationship has been interrupted by a machine, and then the translation comes in post-machine, and therefore is having to establish a relationship with the machine rather than the author, which is not something I've ever been taught how to do. And I don't think it's something that that is very easy to do. And certainly the machine, for its part, isn't able to reciprocate in that relationship. And maybe that's one reason we find it difficult. So I'm going to sum up now and present my case for the court, if you like. So to sum up then, I want to give some new perspectives, as I've hopefully outlined in this talk. So I started by giving you the translation business as I saw it, but the conventional view is probably for the translation business to be seen in a narrower way. So people who are directly involved in translating and in commissioning the work, but not probably beyond that too much. The conventional view of language sees it very much as a code, as a set of nuts and bolts. It's a mechanical problem, if you like, and translation therefore is often seen as a mechanical process. It's a process that we have to go through in order to get those words decoded and then re-encoded into another language. And the implications of that conventional view, as they play out in reality, are that we get patchwork texts, and these patchwork texts take effort to read, whether that's by the business consumer or whether it's by the translator. Is that bringing invisible losses to business? Are they losing business, you know, by people walking away without ever having made their appearance known? Businesses won't know that because they can't measure it very easily, but that doesn't mean to say it's not happening. So that is a real risk that businesses run. And following that view to its logical conclusion, it's not healthy for translators, is it? Because it sees translators as overheads, as an unwanted cost to business. So it puts translators, if you like, on the liabilities side of the balance sheet. The alternative view, on the other hand, sees a wider view of the translation business with a large number of people directly and indirectly involved. It sees language as a means of communicating and maintaining relationships, so it's person-centered, and therefore translation can be seen as a person-centered practice. The implications of this view is, as we saw, we get texts that are customer-centered or reader-centered. They're effortless to read. Does that mean invisible gains to business? Maybe it does. Again, it's not something we can easily measure, but it's not something to be ignored either. Just because we can't measure it doesn't mean to say it isn't there. And finally, if we follow that alternative view through to its logical conclusion, then we can actually say that translators are stakeholders that enhance business value. So rather than being a liability on the business balance sheet, we've actually turned ourselves into an asset. And that's the way I think we need to start promoting ourselves as translators and the translation business, the translation profession as a whole. And I'm going to give you a couple of action points now to do that. And the way we need to do this is to change people's minds. And it's very simple what I'm going to tell you to do, or give you, some action points to do. And it's based on changing the way we talk about things. Now, there's been no better example of how this works than this year. Beginning at this time last year, we'd never come across, or rather we hadn't come across in the context that we now know it, of the word or term self-isolate. The word self and the word isolate has existed since I don't know when, but that word self-isolate never really came into being until the early part of 2020, when all of a sudden it was used to incite some real action on the part of the general public to try and change our minds about what we're doing in life to protect the NHS and ourselves from this virus that we are in the middle of. So the fact that language caused a sea change of behaviour, which continues and no doubt will continue for many months to come, is evidence that language can change minds if only we change the way we talk about things. So that's what I'm proposing we do. We need to change the way we say a few things. So rather than talk about the translation industry, which I don't think is very helpful, because translation industry just perpetuates this vision of the translation as a mechanical problem, the nuts and bolts of language. It sort of conjures up the idea of a machine, and we don't even think about people. In fact, the people in that picture there's no people in it, the people become invisible. So rather than calling it an industry, I think we need to call it a business. We need to talk about the translation business because that's what we do. The translation business is a business. It generates value for translators and businesses alike, and it's done for the benefit of people, it's done by people, and it's done in conjunction with people. So it's very much a person-centered thing. So I think we need to start moving away from translation industry and moving towards talking about the translation business. And you can do this whether you're talking about it, emailing about it, whether you're writing a journal article about it. You can start talking about translation in those terms. And similarly, I think we need to move away from the translation process, because that again conjures up this vision of a production line where, the words go in at one end and come out at the other, 95% churned out by a machine with people tweaking a few bits here and there. As translators, that's not how we want to be seen, and it certainly isn't what we do. So I think instead, we need to start talking about it as a translation practice, in the same way that doctors who practice medicine call themselves they call themselves general practitioners, practitioners of law. They talk about, having a legal practice, don't they? So I think that if we want to be seen as professionals, and if we want to be considering the translation as a profession, then we have to start talking about it in terms of a professional practice rather than a process, which tends to dehumanize it once again. So they're the action points really I'd like you to take away, and that's just a simple changing of language. Very, very simple, very easy. You can start doing it in the next 5 minutes. But if everybody does it, and if everybody starts getting used to those terms, then hopefully it will change people's minds about what we do in the business. And also then it'll help to start improve those ideas about status and pay and all of those other things that go along with it. So on that note, I think I've got about 1 minute to go, and I'm going to invite questions now. I need to somehow be able to see where these questions are coming. I know, I've got Q&A here. Right, I'm going to be very quick because I don't think I've got very long. Right, let's have a look. Right, I'm not going to be able to answer all of these. I'll just take them in order. I've got a question here from Connor Bartlam. As a translator, how do you feel the value of human contribution has increased or improved over the 18 years you've been active? Yeah, that's a good question, Connor. I think for me personally, I've got to understand an awful lot about what's needed in a translation. And, you know, I probably came into translation thinking it was just a case of subject skills and subject knowledge and language skills. And I thought, you know, that in itself was the be all and end all. You know, we talk a lot, don't we, about having specialisms to bring to bear on translation, and obviously also having the language skills as well. That goes without saying. But I think there's an awful lot of business experience that I've gained over the last 18 years that and also I would have to say a lot of webinars and conferences that I've been to and journals that I've read, and I have to say also the PhD that I did, because that has changed the way I talk to people about translation. And actually it's even influenced the way I put my translations together, you know, the way I engage in that author-reader relationship. That's actually shaped the way I think about translation now. So that's definitely happened in the last 10 years at least. Right. Oh gosh, there's a long question here about ethics and NHS and healthcare settings. And I'm running out of time. I think I'm going to have to say I can't really comment on things like defendants and healthcare settings, because that's not the kind of work I'm involved in, and certainly not on the ethics front. And without sort of being able to investigate that question in a bit more depth, I'm sorry, I can't really give a very coherent answer. So do I see, I've got another question here from Emily Patterson. Do I see a future of translators acting as a moderator of this sort of translating rather than doing actually translating? Well, that's a question really that this presentation addresses, and hopefully you'll kind of have got some of that. But I mean, yeah, I can see that there is a need for translators acting as moderators of this kind of translation, certainly while it's still there. But I would like to think that in the future, you know, the value of human beings in translation will be appreciated more and more, because there is only so much a moderator can do, and there is only so much correction a moderator can do. And at the end of the day, we can't reshape a text, we can't recast that text in any other way. So it's a business risk that businesses are running, and okay, they might see it as a risk that they think is worth taking, but they've only got to fall down the crack once, and all of a sudden that becomes something that they have to recover from. Maybe they'll recover quickly, maybe they won't. Do they need to take that risk? Do they not? Well, with human translators, they wouldn't need to take that risk. It's all a risk assessment exercise, really. So I think the future of translation needs to bring that into play a little bit more, so that businesses realize the risks that they're taking, but also the fact that if humans are brought in, that risk is very much reduced. Hopefully, I'd like to say even removed. I think I'm going to have to stop there, because I've certainly gone over my 45 minutes. Nobody is coming in on me to say stop, but I'm going to do the right thing and stop, because I feel it's not courteous to the next speaker if I'm hogging time. So I'm going to, do I stop my screen share now? I'm not sure what happens here. I'm also not sure if I can answer any more questions. But I'd just like to say at this point, somebody said thank you, and I would like to echo that. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I can see there's a lot of you, 129. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to the Language Show for a fantastic weekend of talks, which I've signed up for no end. So I'm looking forward to seeing more. Thank you very, very much.